Okay. Happy Thursday, everybody.
Thursday.
We all recovered from sumo? Nope. All right. Welcome to On Flexibility. This is the third and final slideshow in this particular series. There'll be one more tomorrow. Yeah, let's jump right into it here. So, what is flexibility? We're going to hear from Bodhidharma, we're going to hear from Heidegger again, and we're going to hear from Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Do you guys know him?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to talk about flexibility in practice, in particular stretching, humility, and trust as the way to greater flexibility, not necessarily physically, but psychologically. Okay. Next. What is flexibility? What does that mean?
It means you can hold your shit, but also bend.
Hold your shit, but also bend.
Hold your shape.
Shape.
Also hold your shit.
Okay? Hold your shape, but also bend. What else?
Able to pivot.
Able to pivot. Okay.
Quickly. You have to pivot almost instantly.
So if you can only pivot slowly, is it not flexible or is it just less flexible?
Less flexible.
Okay. Hold shape. Can pivot. What else?
Not rigid.
Not rigid.
Responsive to external conditions.
I like that. Okay. Responsive to external conditions. I've always been partial to the descriptor like a suppleness of spirit. Flexible like muscle is flexible. Right? What else?
And remain
Generalist.
whole under adversity.
Can remain whole under adversity. Dan, did you say something?
I said like a generalist.
Oh, like a generalist. Yeah.
The, version of flexibility.
So like maybe being able to bring a lot of different skills and resources to bear on a single situation or a lot of different perspectives. Okay. What else?
Light grasp. A light grasp.
A light grasp?
Yeah.
Like catching a butterfly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Try to not do the same thing we did with, I think it was masculinity, like a less positive example of flexibility. I'm not sure I have the specific thing in mind, but oftentimes people will call you hear the phrase morally flexible as a bad thing.
Morally flexible or maybe relativist, something like that. Yeah, what are some of the failure modes of flexibility?
Because you don't enforce your boundaries.
Okay, and inconsistent, don't enforce boundaries.
So it jumps around too much, doesn't lacking grit.
Okay. Lack in grit. What else?
No identity.
No identity. That's pretty different than no self, right? That's pretty different than the the Buddhist concept of being one with the moment. Remember we talked about that swinging wildly between the id and the superego, swinging wildly between the passions and the inner critic, right? Flexible in the wrong places.
Excess flexibility is just chaos.
Okay. So some amount of hardness or some amount of firmness or some amount of solidity that seems necessary, but
I think you make the argument that a lot of what you're talking about in the masculine mandating mental health too yesterday was, we have a society, not that there were other things were perfect before, but we now have excess flexibility, conceptual flexibility in society, and that creates a lot of stress for people, a lot of suffering.
okay, yeah, that's right. Stress and suffering.
Thinking about it
It's tricky to get this balance right, huh? Sorry, go ahead.
from the perspective of the body, you can get injured if you lack flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
but you can also have higher injury risk if you're hypermobile.
Yeah. So there's a balance. So there's a balance. So flexibility is not an unqualified good, right? Okay.
And I think that there's probably something metaphorical about that.
Okay. That's pretty good. All right. Let's jump in. Does that feel, anybody else have anything else to add? Okay. This is Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma brought Buddhism to China from India and supposedly was a Persian fellow with blue eyes, so very well-traveled guy. Also very legendary figure, kind of guy that, like cut his eyelids off and the first tea plants grew where his eyelids fell, very, very mythological figure. But I have no idea if there's a historicity that's been established about Bodhidharma. I have no idea if he was actually alive or if we know that. But towering figure in Zen Buddhism, the founder of it, also supposedly brought Kung Fu to China. So, towering figure. 3 major ideas from him. The first one, everything in the apparent world is impermanent, right? So the apparent world that we live in, which is to say what we perceive at our scale and with our sense organs, everything is impermanent, ever-changing from our perspective, right? Mountains erode over time. There's absolutely nothing that we can count on staying the same. Ultimately, maybe except awareness, or ideas of the eternal in metaphysics or in transcendent, right? If you have those beliefs. But everything else changes, everything else shifts. So to become attached to anything, remaining the same is to make a grave error and to invite suffering and grief. All right? Flexibility comes from absolute self-trust. This is a weird thing. This is a tricky thing in Buddhism because Buddhism is always talking about how there's no separate self. And then they'll turn around and say something like, absolute self-trust, right? And it's like, well, okay, what are we talking about here? So for Bodhidharma, clinging to any rigid opinions or concepts about the world was a signal of a lack of trust in one's ability to just meet whatever challenges were coming up, like moment to moment. So paradoxically, right, being one with the moment is the most able you can be. And if you can't be one with the moment, it's because you don't trust your ability to meet whatever life comes at, whatever life throws at you, right? So Bodhidharma thought a flexible, fluid self, that it's always sort of one with conditions and doesn't take on a solid concept, doesn't take on a I'm this or I'm that, have to be one thing, is something that can be mastered like a tool. Make sense? And then finally, a skillful man rolls like a boulder. So Bodhidharma didn't think that we create vitality through generating force in our body, but rather through relaxed, effortless yielding to life. So just as in sitting meditation, right? Or in Kung Fu or Tai Chi or yoga or these kinds of things, right? So when we've mastered yielding, we become like a boulder tumbling down a mountain path, rolling and turning according to the terrain. Make sense? It's kind of like there's already this natural vitality, this natural life force in us. And if we don't put any brakes on it and we just roll down the mountain, we just meet the terrain and roll that way. Something else is coming up, go that way. Something else is coming up, go that way. Don't worry about it. Make sense? All right. We got Heidegger again, because his ideas are pretty important, I think. All right, so human existence is fluid adaptive coping. All right, so Heidegger described existence itself as a fundamental process of adaptation and coping. So human existence copes through practical interactions with tools and other entities. And he had this concept of an object being ready to hand, which is psychologically invisible. It's when you become one with something. We talked a little bit about this, like when your smartphone is ready to hand. It's designed to be ready to hand, right? Your car is ready to hand. And when you're really good with a tool, that's just part of you. Okay? Heidegger thought rigidity is inauthenticity, which is to say rigid conformity to social norms reduces your ability to respond skillfully, right? We got echoes of the should-want game from yesterday, right? If you're just rigidly conforming to the shoulds and just kind of taking that as your, default way of being, you can't actually be skillful. You can't actually be flexible because you can't think outside of those things, right? Has everybody met somebody who's like just has like a frame of understanding the world and just like can't go out of that because it's not right? You know what I mean? It's like not what we do. They're not highly flexible people. So Heidegger thought when the self is flexible, a person can adapt not only to the needs of the present moment, but to personal possibilities, possible selves, possible ways of being. And this means a dynamic and individualized way of being, right? Rather than a sort of collectively constructed subjectivity, right? And then finally, maybe a bit in opposition to Hegel, or at least building on that and in conversation with that, Heidegger thought history was driven by adaptation. So governed by a process of mutual fittedness between humans and being itself. So like being changes, or we could say that the preferences of the universe change, and then history is the process of human beings changing in order to get in line with it. Right? So the universe is constantly shifting, constantly changing, everything's impermanent, and history is our attempt to get in line with this constantly shifting, impossible to grasp thing that we're in constant relationship with, right? So Heidegger used a word being as trying in particular. He used a lot of words trying to get away from words like spirit and words like God and those sorts of things, just to try to get fresh looks at them outside of existing frameworks. So when he was talking about being, history is driven by adaptation to being, you can sub in the great Tao or the universe or God or one of those things. Sort of think of it like maybe not like a musician, but like the music that's coming from the music of the spheres, the divine music, right? Whatever it is, this thing that's going on that we're all a part of. That's what Heidegger called being. And human beings commune with it and try to align with it, right? Try to figure out what is it trying to bring into existence? What is it trying to coalesce around? And then how do we coalesce around that? Make sense? Okay. We got a pretty fancy philosophy degree in the audience. How did I do on Heidegger? Is that good? Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Being in Time is a rough read. So, all right. Next up, we have Nassim Nicholas Taleb. This guy is a lot of fun to follow on Twitter because he's
A curmudgeon.
he's quite a curmudgeon. Yeah, he's quite he loves to start fights and he loves to be a dick, and it's fun to watch him. He's very, very certain. But he wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, and did a series of essays and sort of like exploring this concept at length. This idea of flexibility at a systems level results in something called anti-fragility, which is to say a system that can absorb damage and blows, and then rather than having its structural integrity compromised, or rather than even bending with the blow, it simply takes the damage, reorganizes itself in order to kind of learn from the damage, and then becomes a different kind of system. So it like incorporates uncertainty, risk, fear, damage, that sort of thing, and just goes, okay, I will simply get better. I will simply adapt to these conditions, right? This is an emergent property in highly adaptable systems, and these sort of systems, and we could think there are some human individuals that are a lot like this too. Certainly my experience in the Marine Corps had the flavor of this concept before Taleb put it into a book. But it's, the conditions on the ground are ever changing, so we need to as well, right? And that's basically the idea behind it. So surviving uncertainty, shocks to the system, you can do better than that. You can actually thrive on uncertainty and shocks to your system, right? So an anti-fragile system is a self-transforming system. Okay. I'm shielding some glare, so please, I'm not doing like a strange Buddhist mudras or anything. So next, anti-fragility is superior to structural hardness. All right, so hardness erodes and is difficult to improve on when circumstances call for it. So it's great for single-use stuff, right? If you have a wall that needs to keep pretty static kind of invader out for 1,000 years, like you can make that really hard and that's probably going to be fine. But if the enemy is like able to adapt and evolve in any way, then your wall eventually is going to become kind of a liability at some point when they figure out how to beat it, right? Because you can't take that thing apart and rearrange it into better defenses to keep up with them, right? So active anti-fragility benefits from change and evolves in positive directions. And we would want to think less about the hardness of an oak tree or the hardness of a Great Wall of China or something like this, and more like muscle, right? More like really well-developed, supple, flexible, strong muscles. Okay? I think character also benefits from suppleness. And then finally, failure can be more valuable than success. Right? I mean, nobody's trying to fail, but people who fail in creative ways and adapt well to them often find great success with those lessons later on. So the freedom to experiment with uncertainty is more important than prediction. The freedom to experiment with uncertainty is more important than prediction. And the opportunities for growth created by failure are greater than those created by success. All right? Any questions about those three perspectives? What do you guys think about that?
I haven't read Taleb. Like, he probably has examples then of modern systems that do this better and worse? Do you have any of those in mind off the top of your head or something? It just looks like it's systems level. I'm just trying to-
a lot of his examples have to do with investing and
Markets.
things like this, huh?
The financial markets. itself.
Financial markets.
The stock market itself is anti-fragile.
Right. Yeah, that's a good example. I like to think of it in terms of individuals. You know, if you have someone who's doing everything they can to fortify themselves against pain, that's going to end up being an extraordinarily painful life, right? Because they're not optimizing for pain is inevitable. So then, how am I going to respond to that, right? So building in for good mental health, which I think flexibility is balanced flexibility is a really major part of. You might even also say one of the failure modes I think of contemporary mental health is that people kind of build this like beautiful golden cage for themselves that like they love everything in it, but can't actually really like relate to other people very well and can't actually like, right. It kind of turns into this like living your best life. It's self-love, it's self-care, it's all these kinds of things. And then you're in this like gorgeous golden cage but you actually don't have the key to it anymore because you've practiced it so much into automaticity that you just can't relate anymore. And we see this kind of all over the place, you know. There's far too much flexibility. There's far too much like deconstruction and not anywhere near enough reconstruction or anywhere near enough like boundaries for the self, right? Who am I not? You know, things like that. So there's certainly, that would certainly be a failure mode of flexibility in a human system. You know, it's like sort of out of balance or the wrong kind. Yeah.
Well, at first glance, who am I not? I associate that more with the opposite of flexibility, perhaps. Wondering if you can just expand on how you think about identity like that.
Mm-hmm. So to the identity is another one of these concepts. The self concept is another one of these things that's felt and experienced as true precognitively when you're in touch with it. And so it's something that's kind of both created and discovered at the same time. Unlike most, there are going to be times in life. What's the right way to talk about this? It's good to keep your identity as small as you can. But there need to be the self is fundamentally made of boundaries. The self is fundamentally made of, this is what I won't do. I can't be this. I can't be someone. I can't be who I am if I do that thing, right? Trauma very often results from this thing happened to me. I was overwhelmed. I was unable to respond. And now I don't know who I am. Grief is a loss of practical identity. I don't know who I am without this person or without this thing or without this home or this situation or whatever the case might be. Deciding who you're not and keeping sort of like small but tight boundaries around what really makes me feel ashamed. Like what am I, where is this the fear of shame and where is this genuinely I stand totally ashamed before myself when I do this thing. That would be, who am I not? Does that make sense? So I'm making like a fine-grained distinction between shame and the fear of shame.
Yeah, I'm just still going to relate that to flexibility, but you don't have to hold up.
Well, so in this case, right, so a pure flexibility of identity would lead people into doing things that actually go against the true shape of their character. And so a balanced flexibility of identity would be isolating and really identifying what parts of you would genuinely be ashamed of yourself. And then what parts of you are like, I'm afraid of shame in front of others, or I'm afraid of what this might say about me, or I'm afraid of, right? That's a very different kind of thing. That's That's an aspect of identity or an element of identity that's guarded by fear, not by the true felt sense of who you are. So you would want to build flexibility anywhere that fear is currently hemming you in, but not with the parts that keep you in touch with you. Make sense? Okay.
It's like you said, the key phrase there was balance.
Balanced flexibility. Yeah, same as Hugh was talking about earlier, right? Like hypermotility means injury. Stretching too far means injury. So speaking of stretching, right? For most men, developing flexibility means letting go of early conditioning toward certainty, rigidity, and endurance. How many of us guys have received conditioning about endurance being masculine? Almost everybody. Right? But if you contrast endurance with something like anti-fragility, you get pretty different notions, right? Endurance isn't just like taking the damage and staying hard or staying something. It's like taking the damage and growing, right? All right, I'm going to change. I'm going to adapt to this thing. Can't avoid the damage. You know what I mean? Right? And so letting go of these things, replacing them with what I think are superior options, which are things like epistemic humility, which is to say, we don't fucking know how we know things, right? Like, it's really hard to be certain of anything. I don't think you actually can be certain of anything, right? Kind of Socrates' thing about the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? Starting with really being open to, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know how I know things. And then kind of staying in a maximally open and flexible space with that. And then curiosity, risk tolerance, and I think Bodhidharma was right, self-trust, which is to say, like, trusting the whole of your being and the knowledge that all of you has, including what's in your unconscious and what's in your body, and then getting real, authentic feedback from the world. So you're not like, oh God, like what is the culturally sanctioned answer to this, or what is the field's consensus answer to this, or what did my dad say about this, or what is, I don't know, somebody I admire, what do they have to say about this? Well, I would just check your body and your unconscious and do your absolute best with the situation and trust that you're either going to meet it or you're going to fail in a way that gives you really important feedback that lets you meet that situation better the next time. Right? Trust your failures. Make sense? Okay, next up, becoming flexible. So, a couple ideas on becoming flexible here. From Taleb again, right? The barbell strategy. Use extreme caution 90% of the time and take high risk opportunities 10% of the time. That's what he does with investments. I don't think you necessarily need to do that with everything, but I like this barbell strategy. There's another great quote I can't remember who it is right now, but it's something like, be orderly and disciplined in your life so you can be violent and creative in your work. Right? So like, make sure that your life is well ordered. Make sure that your life is well disciplined. Make sure you have a lot of safety, right? A lot of safety at home, a lot of safety in yourself, a lot of safety in your relationships. And then adventures become pretty easy from a strong base, a strong, safe foundational base, right? You can even go on fucking really crazy adventures if you know that you got plenty of backup safety, right? So that would be how I would think about the barbell strategy psychologically. All right. 2, don't get comfortable. Don't get comfortable. How many of us, how comfortable is life right now for everybody? At least it's extremely comfortable, right? So much so we can really kind of go brain dead. Just kind of turn off, go about your life and just kind of believe that you're comfortable and everybody else is comfortable and nothing bad's going to happen. And weirdly enough, being at, that comfortable and that warm and that soft makes you really quite brittle and quite fragile. You know, if you don't regularly give yourself doses of discomfort, if you don't regularly push your own boundaries, if you don't, and I don't just mean going to the air-conditioned gym and lifting a kettlebell in a program that somebody else designed, right? I mean, find your fears, find what you're afraid of, find what's scary, find what's uncomfortable, right? And try to dose that on a regular basis. Keep expanding on a regular basis. That develops a meta skill. It's not just the skill of facing whatever it is that's right that you're facing in that moment, right? It also develops this faith in yourself that like, or even a kind of unconscious self-identity as like, yeah, I'm somebody who pushes my own boundaries. And so when something comes up that is like pushing your boundaries, you're like, that's okay. I'm the kind of guy that handles things like this, at least on an unconscious level, right? It's not like a stretch to be like, oh God, but right? It's not a stretch. You're just like, yeah, let's roll like a boulder. Easy peasy, right? And finally, via negativa, right? So instead of trying to add anti-fragility or add flexibility or add things to your system, try just removing fragility, right? If you're unnecessarily dependent on something, some kind of harmful influence, and I'm not saying like try to quit vaping or drinking, you know, cold turkey right now, but yeah, make a plan. If you're unnecessarily dependent on something, that's impermanent. You're going to lose access to it at some point, right? And you're going to suffer at that time in a way that's like unimaginable than if you're going to have to, if you don't take charge of quitting it, life's just going to decide for you when it's time to quit, right? And if it's a sufficiently unhealthy habit, it'll kill you with it. So if you're unnecessarily dependent on something, get rid of the dependency or open up space. Say, well, okay, if I'm totally dependent on my car to get around, all right, what's it like to get around your town on bicycle or on public transit or on something like that? You don't have to do it forever. You don't have to switch and get rid of your car. But like, why not try getting around for 2 weeks on the bus? Why not try getting around for 2 weeks on a bicycle? Just see what happens. Totally different perspectives. It's uncomfortable, a little bit of flexibility. Make sense? I guarantee you guys are in all kinds of weird, rigid psychological grooves that you're not even aware of until you start playing with them. Me too. Don't get me wrong. The ego closes down around perspective very easily, right? All right, so next up, be humble. We talked about epistemic humility a little bit. Understand the limits of knowledge. Understand the limits of the conceptual mind. Understand the limits of rationality. There's no objectivity without subjectivity and vice versa, right? So understand the limits of what we can know and rely on experience as well. The rational mind and the emotional mind is the wise mind, as they say in DBT. And I think it's something everybody can hear and benefit from. The next up, keep your inputs simple, which is to say, let complexity flow from simple, sustainable efforts. If your efforts are super complex, they will also generate complexity and eventually become so complex that you can't sustain it, right? So the inputs need to be simple and the complexity can naturally, organically form from that. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. And finally, beginner's mind, just like we talked about in quality, right? Approaching all tasks, even and maybe especially those that you've mastered, as a beginner. And this will keep you open to possibility and change, right? Just like the coach we talked about who teaches his players to tie their shoes the very first day. Right? These guys learned it when they were 5 years old, but we're going to do it again. And I bet you half the students who are doing that learn something from that coach about how to tie their shoes in a particular way. That's why he does it, right? Just staying open, even to the most elementary stuff. Maybe there's something new I can pick up. Maybe there's some dimension I haven't been paying attention to, right? Same way you can read a book every 10 years and get something different from it. Well, maybe you can tie your shoes, differently every 10 years and get something new out of it. And then finally, develop trust, which is to say develop self-trust, right? And the first one to do that is leave absolutely nothing in your efforts, especially efforts on behalf of yourself. If a habit of giving everything you've got to life eradicates self-doubt. If you did your absolute best, it actually doesn't matter whether you succeeded or failed. You know you gave everything that you got, and you will have peace of mind about it afterwards. There was either you got what you wanted or there was nothing more you could do. Right? Next up, let go of personal agendas. Best as you can. Right? Pride, greed, ego poisons. These all make yourself less trustworthy. It's harder to trust yourself when you do things out of pride, when you do things out of greed. Right? Because you can't just trust reflexively that you have a habit of acting in concert with the real. You have a habit of acting in concert with your deepest and truest self. Every time you betray that, some part of you is like, am I going to show up right this time? But if you're in a habit of showing up right, that part of you just never splits consciousness. Right? You just stay in flow. And then finally, hey, all right, it's a Buddhist retreat. Surrender to the present. Right? Embrace the unfolding of life with a profound confidence. Just trust. Just trust that it's all happening in the way that it's supposed to because of causes and conditions, right? Everything is happening for a reason. All right? And finally, I think this is one of my favorite things in Zen. They call it dying the great death. Let absolutely everything go. Release absolutely everything. And whatever keeps coming back and keeps coming into your life is salient. Right? Or which is to say, release everything and what's yours will return. Right? What's really important to you, what's really authentically important to you will just keep occurring over and over again because that's your karma. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, one question.
Yeah.
Let's see. What you said about giving everything you've got, so that you don't have a question. I see the point there, so that, like making excuses in advance, right? Like, well, I held back, who knows what could happen. I'm just not sure how you relate that to flexibility, because my first thought to that was about slack.
What do you mean by slack?
I mean, spare room, spare energy, time, arriving 5 minutes early, giving yourself half an hour at the beginning or the end of the day, having a day clear of obligations, whatever it means.
Well, I think all those things are necessary for giving your best.
Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. The reason I'm sort of relating this back to Bodhidharma's idea that like flexibility comes from, immense self-trust. Like, the more you trust yourself, the more you don't have to carry around a concept of who you are. You just trust that whatever the moment brings, you can meet it. And the way you build that trust is by giving your absolute best to everything that you do. I think the way you give your absolute best to everything that you do is you get sufficient rest, you leave sufficient slack, right? But you make preparations. You mind quality traps, all the things that we've been talking about here. Don't let anything just be unconscious. Don't let anything, to the best of your ability, don't slop it. You know what I mean? Don't fiddle fuck it. Give it everything you got. You know what I mean? Or maybe bring all of your capabilities, all your capacities to bear on your pursuits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like several of these points relate to not letting anything sort of stagnant in you, like rot, that makes you more prone to break as opposed to stable if things change.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think it's maybe helpful to think of a static ego or like a static self-image as still water. You're going to get mosquitoes and disease and nasty shit pretty quick. You know what I mean? because it's not moving with the flow of life. Any other questions? Did I answer yours? Yeah. Good. Thanks everybody for, oh, did you have something?
How, like the true shape of one's character, I'm curious by, and then authentic feedback. Like, what are the types of, I mean, I guess maybe without, it might have to be more particular. How do we actually seek this feedback out? Yeah.
I think the work here, I can tell you what worked for me, was a kind of 12-step like moral inventory. But it wasn't just like, what are the worst things I've ever done? But it was like, when are the times I felt the absolute worst about myself? You know, when were the times I was most ashamed of my actions? And I did this after kind of working through toxic shame. I had just that kind of reflexive shame people have about themselves. And I was really able to look at actions. So in a way, it was like once I'd moved from toxic shame to recognizing guilt, then it was like, what are the things that, like, if I did these again, I couldn't be my best self, right? Like, but going and looking and really pulling all those things out of my past and really reckoning with them, instead of just like, I don't want to look at those things and I'm just going to pretend that they're not there and I'm just going to let them fester in my unconscious and leak out all over the people I love, right? I'm going to pull that shit out and I'm going to go, what went wrong? And how do I prevent that from going wrong again in the future? Or how do I avoid situations in which that part of me comes out? Right? Because that part of me is still in there, but that's not the guy that I want to be. You know?
How do you thinking about like the times when you felt the most guilt, felt the worst, versus the times where you maybe actually felt like the best or most alive, like being negative, and then, or sort of that aspirational self-accounting versus also like understanding what to avoid, as you're saying, you're made of what you also can say no to, but then saying, yeah, looking at the no's versus looking at the yeses.
And when it comes to when we're talking about the shaping of character, how do you shape a human's character when they're very young? You teach them what to be ashamed of.
It's mostly, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah, that's dangerous, right? Or we don't do that, right? I mean, obviously, when they're first like babies and they're just tripping balls, you don't do that to them, right? But once they're toddlers and they're still kind of tripping balls, but it's not as much, right? The whole thing is boundaries. The whole thing is like, you know, this is what you should be ashamed of. This is what it's healthy to be ashamed of. This is what is healthy to stay away from. This is what hurts when you go near it. And that's incomplete for all of us. Nobody gets a perfect set of conditioning that works perfectly for us, right? You get a cultural set of conditioning plus mom and dad's whatever's been passed down through your family, which, don't get me wrong, it's great. Thank God we do it, right? But like going back afterwards and like opening up your conditioning and being like, what am I ashamed of that I don't need to be? What am I not ashamed of that I need to be? You know, it's like right sizing what you should be afraid of, who you should be afraid of being. I think it's also extremely important to get into those higher vibrations as well and get into like, what do I really love? What do I really desire? So you can eventually act from there. But I would say that trying to go straight to that without doing the moral work is spiritual bypassing.
I like that definition of spiritual bypassing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We all know the love and light people that can't take accountability for shit. You know what I mean? So I've been that guy too. Had to reckon with that one. Make some apologies. Yeah. Anything else?
There's a certain amount of courage required for like all of this. It seems like keeping yourself honest for that inventory, when actually probably, yeah, these patterns, like parts of these, like it feels like death or something like this. Like,
Yeah, no, it is.
you know.
Yeah,
So I guess
it's a kind of it.
the pattern of communication that you have to those parts of yourself that do reassure that there will actually come growth from this. Like, I guess some of the sources of that trust or what that kind of looks like to keep it like going forward and be like, it is actually safe to do so. Is it that safety? Yeah, I guess it sounds like it's like having that safety.
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit woo-woo here. I actually think the human spirit naturally moves towards integrity when it has a safe environment to do so. It, like, if most of us do, when we have the genuine external and internal safety, that's what we want. The reason 12-step is so successful is there are sponsors who've been through this who can provide hope and an external safety to help the person overcome the internal unsafeness. Because if you got a pretty vicious inner critic, yeah, you can go open up the stuff that you're ashamed of. You're going to start ripping yourself to bits. You're not going to be able to sleep. Things get unstable. So it's really helpful to have a container. This is where spiritual community is really helpful. Someone else who's done it too.
Yeah.
Okay. I genuinely love recovery people. They like always have the earthiest, most grounded kind of spirituality because they're like, they're former addicts, right? So like they've done some really gnarly shit usually in their lives and they've come to terms with it and been like, all right, that's something that's in me. How do I make sure, right, that part of me has a healthy place to live and doesn't ever hijack the car and drive it to the bar, right?
Someone put it on Twitter the other day that kind of reckoned with the core Buddhist concept of tanha or craving. They've seen it, they've gone to the extreme end and like had to sort of figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is why I really like the idea of a Western Buddhism where you have Dharma sponsors instead of Dharma teachers. It's like, oh, you've got delusions? I've fucking had all of them. Like, me too, buddy. Let's talk about it. You know what I mean? Rather than like, I'm going to sit up on a fucking dais and I'm going to tell you guys what enlightenment is or something. It's crazy. Anything else? Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Let's get some dinner, huh? Do you guys want to start it earlier or do you want to get some rest?